Do you ever look up at a tree and wonder why it's shaped like that? Why is this tree shaped like an umbrella and this tree shaped like a giant mushroom? Well, it turns out that some of the most common tree shapes are actually signs of serious stress. But not all trees look like they're struggling. There are also trees that grow in cool shapes, like spirals and circles. So what gives? Why do trees come in so many different shapes? Some of the answer has to do with how trees grow, which is actually pretty simple. Most trees start out with just one central trunk, and the branches grow out from that. Each branch has a bud where new leaves or shoots will emerge, and because each bud can only grow so big before those shoots start bumping into each other, the branches themselves have to grow longer and longer to make room for all the new growth. That's why young trees often have a conical shape. The center grows taller faster than the branches on the outside. As the tree gets bigger, those outside branches end up growing faster than the center. So the top of the tree starts getting shaded, and the overall shape becomes more rounded. As trees get even older, their roots start searching for water deeper and deeper in the ground, and that causes the trunks of old trees to get wider. It's kind of like when your jeans start getting loose around the waist because you lost weight. Only now the tree is getting thicker, and it does that by adding layers of wood each year. Those layers of wood are called growth rings, and they re what tree lovers use to determine a tree age. So if you want to know how old a tree is, all you have to do is count its rings. But that's just how trees grow in general. What makes them take on different shapes is what kind of environment they find themselves in. Because trees don't just grow taller and wider, they also grow outwards. And as they expand, they often run into things like buildings, power lines, and each other. And these close encounters shape the tree's growth. Like if a tree runs into another tree early on, it can cause the branches to bend upwards, creating a capital T. This is especially common in urban areas where trees are planted close together. These trees may start out looking normal, but after decades of fighting for space, they turn into giant forks. Now, sometimes this competition for space can be friendly. We've seen trees that have grown around each other for hundreds of years, creating cool shapes like this heart tree in Japan. But if there isn't enough space for two trees, they'll fight. One of them will try to outcompete the other for light and water, and usually the taller tree wins. The smaller tree will start growing more branches at the bottom in search of sunlight, and if the struggle goes on long enough, those branches can become a second trunk. This is how trees become multi-stemmed. And although it sounds like we're talking about branches fighting branches, it's really the buds on the ends of the branches that are battling it out. Because here's the thing, buds don't just produce leaves, they also produce something called auxin. Auxin is like a hormone that helps the bud grow. But auxin also stops other buds from growing nearby. In other words, buds that produce more auxin end up blocking the growth of buds on other branches. So when you see a tree with lots of branches at the bottom, it's not just that it ran into something else. It's also that the buds on the top of the tree are producing too much auxin for the buds on the lower branches to survive. But that's not the only reason for bottom-heavy trees. It can also happen when the top of the tree dies. This can be caused by things like disease or boring insects. When the top of the tree dies, it stops producing auxin, so the buds on the lower branches start growing like crazy. They're no longer being held back by the buds on the dead branches above them. All of this to say bottom-heavy trees aren't necessarily unhealthy. They just have a lot of branches on the bottom, because the buds on those branches are strong. We've talked about how trees compete with each other, but trees also have to deal with competing with themselves. Sometimes a tree's branches grow so long they end up crossing each other. And just like how branches compete with other trees, they also compete with each other. Branches that cross end up casting shadows on each other, and that causes the buds on the shaded branches to die. Eventually those branches become too thin, and they snap off. So when branches compete with each other, you'll often see trees take on a vase shape. The branches on the top and the bottom end up growing faster because they not crossing over each other. The branches in the middle are the ones that die off first. We should mention that some trees naturally have a vase shape. For example, the famous tree, known as the Lone Survivor in New Hampshire, was shaped like a vase because it was growing next to a river. The soil on the sides of rivers tends to be shallower, so the tree had to grow its roots deep to find water. It grew deep roots on both sides, which made the middle of the tree get thinner. Now, the Lone Survivor unfortunately fell apart in 2021, but there are still plenty of vase-shaped trees out there. We should also talk about umbrella trees. Umbrella trees are typically the result of pruning, which is when humans cut off certain branches to get the tree to grow in a particular shape. People prune trees for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's so the tree doesn't block the view from a street. Other times it's so people can enjoy a nice view through the branches. And the best time to prune is when the tree is young. If you start pruning a young tree early on, you can get it to grow into any shape you want. Pruning removes the branches that would normally block the view, so you end up with a tree that has a clear opening. You can even prune the branches into a perfect circle to create something called a poodle's tree. Now, we haven't mentioned how trees can grow in spirals or circles, but it turns out these are actually the result of something called apical dominance. Apical dominance is when the bud at the top of the tree dominates the growth of the branches below it. So just like how a capital T is caused by weak lower branches, a spiral or circle is caused by very strong ones. Now, this can happen for no reason. It's actually a genetic trait that can be passed down from parent trees. Or it can be caused by environmental factors like growing up against a wall. Trees can grow in circles for a couple reasons. The most common is that the tree is grafted onto a dwarfed roots. This means that the bottom part of the tree is made to grow slowly, so the tree stays small. Another way trees can end up circular is if they're grown in a container. Growing a tree in a container is kind of like growing it in a pot, and you can imagine how the tree's branches might grow in circles if it doesn't have enough room. But interestingly, a tree's roots will also grow in circles if the container doesn't have enough room. And if the roots end up circling around the pot, the branches will eventually follow. So we've talked about quite a few ways trees end up taking on cool shapes. A tree's shape is basically a visual representation of all the things it's been through. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, if you're looking up at a tree right now, its shape might tell you something about its past. But if you want to learn more about a tree, there's always the Arbor Day Foundation. Every day they help people plant and care for trees. And you can learn more about trees on their website.